welcome to another episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is an old friend, Dr. David Rothenberger from Minnesota. I really want you to listen to or watch this interview because David has a lot of fascinating things to say about navigating life and career. He came from very humble beginnings in South Dakota, where there were really no prospects of going to college, never mind medical school. He was struck very early in life, having witnessed a couple of family tragedies and the loss of two children in very early years, and decided there and then to become a doctor. He decided then, despite the fact that his family had no money or resources to pay for this, that he would work a way out in terms of funding himself, and he would go to Princeton. Why not? He went to Princeton and then went on to medical school, and of course, the rest, as they say, is history. He became a world-renowned colorectal surgeon, making a range of significant and important contributions, and of course became president of ASCRS. His clinical career was derailed totally unexpectedly by a fall in the ice and a neurological injury that stopped him operating. It did not stop him contributing to the world of surgery and university life, where he has continued to be an advocate for faculty welfare and such things as burnout. So I hope you enjoy the conversation and listen to a man of great thoughtfulness and wisdom. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And I'd really love to hear your comments about this and any other interviews that you have an opportunity to see. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining, Dave. I don't know whether you've had the opportunity to see any of these podcasts or listen to them, I should say, because you're meant to listen to a podcast and watch a YouTube.
Yes, I have. I've watched a few. And
you which? You saw a couple of them?
I did listen to a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll know, therefore, that whilst
I sort of have a sense of
yeah, I mean, you'll know, therefore, that whilst obviously we spend a little bit of time talking about life and career, as much as anything else, I'm interested in what I call stuff that matters. You know, the stuff that's not quite related to the CV and how many papers you have and all of that sort of stuff. And I normally ask people to start by saying, telling us a little bit of short life history that says, that starts with the words "I was born in." And I was listening to your grand rounds, your YouTube things, and what I realized was that the people in Tufts were quite lucky to get you to leave Minnesota or the Midwest, because you are like the poster child for the Midwest. So start me off and start with "I was born in."
Yeah, well, I was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota in 1947, so I'm getting to be pretty old. And we were, it was a town of about 55,000 people at that time. My parents were, had been through the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl years. They had lived on farms in central South Dakota, and their lives were tough at that time. And my dad left school after the 8th grade, went with an older brother to California to find work to send money home to the family. My mother left during her senior year in high school, so she didn't finish, with an older sister to do the same thing. They had known each other a little bit in South Dakota, but then rekindled the relationship in California. Took a day off work to get married, and survived through that, time of the Depression. Mom wanted to stay in California. Dad wanted to get back to farming. And then his father got sick. And so they went back home to take care of him, and he died subsequently. long before I was born. And then my mother sort of insisted that they were not staying on a farm. She had had enough of that kind of life. And so they moved from sort of central South Dakota to Sioux Falls, which was the big city in South Dakota at that time. And then I came along. I was the second born. My older sister, 5 years older than I was. And we just grew up in what I thought was a normal life. You know, it was a lower middle class as I look back on it. We didn't have much money, but we never lacked a meal. Maybe it wasn't the best food, but we always had something and we always had clothes. So looking back, it was all right. And then my sister had a baby, Lisa, who was normal at birth. And then and just fun to see. It was great to have a little niece to play with. And she became ill, and no one could quite figure out what was going on. They went around to different specialists, got different opinions. But she, to make a long story short, she just progressively deteriorated and died just under age 2. Subsequently, my sister was pregnant by the time she was sick and was the second child who also died. And, you know, that did something to me. I was probably 13 or 14 years old when I watched this. And I think in my adolescent brain, I decided I'm going to be a doctor and fix that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable. And
was that a realistic proposition for you to, I mean, yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really wasn't. It was, and I didn't tell anybody because I sort of knew it wasn't probably realistic.
Yeah.
But I thought I could figure this out. And I knew guys had gone to college on football scholarships, and I was a reasonable football player at that time. And I thought, well, I could maybe do that, and I could be a pre-med, and that would take care of it. So that was my plan. And I remember at one point we had a family dinner, and one of the men who kind of liked me, I think, said, "David, what are you going to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I'm going to be a doctor." And everybody at the table laughed like crazy. I thought that was the funniest damn thing they'd ever seen or heard of. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. I sort of slipped out of the room and was playing basketball hoops and trying to figure out why that was so funny.
What did they think you were? What did they think? What did they think you were going to do?
Well, they thought what I talked to my mother later, and she said, "David, we don't have money. We're barely getting by as it is, and there's no money for you to go to college. Your dad has told you, you know, you're a big strapping guy. You can get a good construction job or some labor job, and you'll have a good living. You can marry a local girl, and you'll have a great life." And I just sort of said, "Yeah, well, okay." But then I decided I was going to find a way to do it. I was going to find a way to go to med school somehow, to college first and then med school.
Yeah.
So I thought scholarships were the way, football would be the way. But then, and I had a good junior year, was being recruited by a number of local Midwest schools. The University of Nebraska was probably the most prominent one that recruited me. And we had people from our high school had gone there before. And so it was looking positive. And then we were getting ready to start the senior year. I had our practice before school started. And I had a dislocated right shoulder when I was a sophomore, but it popped back in and wasn't a big deal. But then it happened again, only this time with a big hit on it. And it would just fall out of joint when I'd roll over in bed at night. And so I missed the whole season.
Yeah.
And all the scholarship offers that were coming in were taken back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd had 2 appointments, one to Air Force Academy from George McGovern. Air Force Academy was brand new at that time. And that looked like fun, go out and play for Air Force Academy in football and then learn how to fly a jet. It could be better than that, right? But I couldn't. And Carl Munt had given me an appointment to go to West Point. Same thing. I couldn't pass the physical because
Uh,
I can't, after my
yeah,
surgery, I cannot, that's my limited range of motion.
yeah. Don't do it any more than that, you know.
So we, so I thought, well, now what? And I must admit, I was pretty down in the dumps, but um, there were some Ivy League coaches who had been recruiting me, and I really didn't know what the Ivy League was. I had no idea. It
Yeah,
just wasn't on my screen. But anyway, they all the four who had been recruiting me said, you know, hey, listen, we don't give athletic scholarships. It's based on financial need. So you ought to apply, even if you never play. Whoa. So I looked it up and figured out how to do it and sort of got people to send me some reference letters and applied. I got into three of the four, and it sort of came down to looking and saying, all right, what am I going to do? And I really liked the feel of Princeton. At that time, it was an all-male school still, but it was more focused on undergraduate education than were some of the other
right.
schools in the Ivy League. And it seemed like something I could manage. So I took a scholarship along with government loans, low interest loans. And my assigned job was I was going to work in the student laundry doing other guys' dirty underwear. So that was the start. I got dropped. We left from the Air Force, Joe Foss Field in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, with a couple of guys from my high school who were older, and they were going back to Yale. And they said we could rent a car together, and they dropped me off at the front door of Princeton. I said, "Great, okay." I'd never been east of Minneapolis in my life, but we popped in the car and we drove nonstop 22 hours, and they dropped me off at Princeton, and it looked like the place I'd seen on the brochures because, of course, no computers, none of this kind of stuff that
No,
we have
no.
now.
Mm.
I walked in saying, well, maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't, but I'm going to give it a shot.
So at that
And
time,
I did wind up playing.
well, I was going to say at that time, you know, you were sorting it all out yourself, etc. You
Right.
know, were your family still skeptical, or were they very supportive, or they were going, "This guy's
They,
crazy"?
they were, well, they thought it was a little bit crazy, I think. And when I remember when I got those letters, and I said I called it because they all came in one day, the acceptance or rejection letters. I called upstairs. My mother was vacuuming upstairs and said, "Hey, Mom, I got into college today." And she said, "Oh, well, where are you going to go?" And I said, "I think I'll go to Princeton." She said, "Princeton? That's in Minnesota, isn't it?" I said, "Well, there is a Princeton, Minnesota, Mom, but that's a small town. This is Princeton, New Jersey." She said, "New Jersey? Why do you want to go way out there?" I said, "I don't know. It seems like a pretty good school." She said, "Well, okay, but you know the deal. We don't have any money." And I said, "I know. I'll work it out." So that was the way we left.
So
And
you get into
yeah,
Princeton,
it worked
and
out.
you get into Princeton, you know, your own bootstraps, etc., as they say. And we'll
Yeah.
take it as read that you must have been smarter than the average bear, you know, to get your academic scholarship, etc. So when did you start heading towards surgery? I don't know whether you had the opportunity to listen to Robbie Madoff's one. You know, he was what I refer to as
Yeah.
a
He won't be
late
around.
bloomer. You know, a
He's a
late
late
bloomer.
bloomer. Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, I still had in mind the deaths of Lisa and now Brian subsequently. And so I was still thinking I was going to be a pediatrician
Right. Yeah.
if I could get into medical school. And so that was my goal leaving Princeton. And then, I got a scholarship um, at the University of South Dakota. And that in those days, there were three two-year medical schools in the United States: South Dakota, North Dakota, and Dartmouth. And the routine was you'd go there for the first 2 years. And they tried to get local people to be doctors, so they were trying to encourage that. And then you transfer your third and fourth years in medical school to someplace else. And they had done this with other institutions. So I transferred to Tufts in Boston for my third and fourth years. And while I was there, I one of my rotations was on the acute leukemia ward at Boston Floating Hospital. And 95% of kids died within a year of diagnosis in those days. Today, 95% survive into adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it just broke my heart. I couldn't imagine doing it. I'd had another rotation on nephrology um, that I really liked, and it was a great teaching team, including Jerry Kassir, who was the editor in chief of the New England Journal of Medicine for many years, and William Schwartz and Jordan Cohen. Those three were outstanding nephrologists and outstanding teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, huh. And they encouraged me to go into internal medicine. They wanted me to stay at Tufts. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, I want to go back to the Midwest. We want to be closer to our families, because by this time I was married and Kathy's family was also from Sioux Falls. So I matched to what was called an R1, a rotating one internship, 10 months of internal medicine, 2 months of surgery. And I love the surgical rotations. So I talked to Kathy. I said, what would you think if I switched to surgery from medicine? And she said, well, how many more years is that? I said, just a few more, you know. She said, well, okay. So I then matched into the Ramsey County Medical Center surgery program.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, I just ran into Stan Goldberg.
Wow.
And Stan was at the U. He was actually in a private practice, Cursal,
Mm-hmm.
Bone Rectal Surgery Associates Limited. But he was also a clinical professor at the U. And he would go to grand rounds on Saturday mornings from 9 to 12. And he was just part of the university system. And Santat Navatmans who had trained under Stan, was at the U as the only full-time colorectal surgeon. They didn't treat him very well. He was mostly used for colonoscopy, which he was
Yeah.
a real pioneer in developing.
Yeah.
And he taught me colonoscopy
Uh-huh.
in the early days when these scopes were, they were miserable scopes.
I remember.
Oh gosh, they were tough to use, and it was not easy. Anyway, so Sandy eventually left, at which
Yeah.
point
Went to Mayo.
I get a call. Yeah, he went to Mayo for good
Mm-hmm.
reason. And then I got a call. By this time, I had started with the Cursal group. I'd done the fellowship. Stan had kept me on and the other guys in the group had kept me on as a fellow and as a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I suggested to them, because they were in private practice in Minneapolis. They had an office downtown Minneapolis, one in the south suburb and one on the north suburbs.
Yeah.
And I suggested maybe I should start another office in the East Metro area, St. Paul area. So that's what I did. So I was over there by myself and hired a nurse, and we started going, and things started growing. We slowly evolved that program. Things just worked out. And pretty soon I was so busy that I needed a partner. And I had met John Bulls when I was in training, because he was doing a fellowship under Stan. John had first come to Minnesota to do a transplant fellowship with Dick Simmons and John Najarian.
Mm-hmm.
While he was there, he met Stan Goldberg, who said, oh, you ought to do a colorectal fellowship. That's much more fun than transplant. And so John did that. And that was during that time that I was still, finishing up my surgical residency. I met John and we hit it off. We just were instantly good friends. And so when we needed a new partner in St. Paul, I said, we got to get John Bowles back. Stan said, he'll never come all the way back from Australia. He's just gone home and getting practice going there. I said, well, let's let him make that decision.
Yeah.
And so we called him up. I convinced him to come, and he and Marlene and the three kids came, and so John and I were together. Then our third partner in St. Paul was Doug Wong, who had
Yeah.
also done the fellowship with us.
Mm-hmm.
Doug was a Canadian, Asian
Yep.
heritage, just a superb surgeon. Again, he went back home to Canada, and we recruited him back to
Yeah.
join us in the St. Paul
Mm.
personal practice. But when Sandy left for Mayo, I got a call from John Nigerian saying, I want you to come over here and be my butt man. I said, well, Dr. Nigerian, um, you know, I'd be willing to come over and talk to you about what I think would be a better thing for you, for the university patients, and for me. He said, well, I just want you to come over here. And I said, well, I'll come over to discuss something, but I'm not going to come over and be your butt man.
Yeah.
So that led to a series of meetings for about 3 months. And I think, we went back and forth, and Stan was involved, of course, and other people involved. And fortunately, the Nigerian said, okay, I get it. And we agreed that the St. Paul cluster, and he knew John Bowles from it when he did the transplant fellowship.
Yeah.
He said, so the St. Paul cluster, as we call ourselves, me, John Bowles, Doug Wong, and we may have had a fourth one by then, Mark Gemlo. And so, anyway, we would cover the university just like we would cover our other hospitals in the East Metro area.
Yeah.
We would always have somebody, we would run a clinic every day. We would go to the operating room there. We would do a full service colorectal service. And that's what we did.
So
and that's how I started.
So
and then
Stan clearly, as he has done many times with many people, saw something in you that told him, and clearly Najarian did. There you were, a young guy, at the big, developing your career. What did they see in you that said, this guy's worth, he's worth a punt, this guy?
Well, I think what they saw was somebody who wanted to make a difference in medicine. I wanted to have an impact. And I thought that my basic human humanity told me we're better off working together.
Mm-hmm.
The common illness, the common diseases, the common problems that people face in healthcare, we're better off if we do this as a team. And if we share the expertise, and if we go back and forth, and we make sure that at the end of the day, we've done everything we possibly could for that individual sitting across the desk from us or across the operating room table from us, that's how things work better. And that was sort of my philosophy. And I continued to work in that fashion. And it's not about, titles. I came over my initial appointment, I think, was something like clinical instructor.
Yeah.
And eventually worked my way up. And you just realize that if you're there and you observe and you use the skills that you acquire as a physician, in the minute a patient walks in the room, you should be observing. You should be saying, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Why do they have their head down? Why are they shuffling? What are they? You can just tell. I mean, you start to have these intuitions about people and what they might be coming for. So I think that's sort of what it was.
So you went on, achieved great things, fame and some fortune, no doubt, and president of this and head of that and chair of that, etc. So when you went across with Najarian, etc., what did success, what was your ambition? You said your ambition was to make a difference, make an impact. But what did success look like then compared to what success looked like when you started walking the corridors of power?
Well, I mean, success to me was, again, building a division of colorectal surgery with the private group, the university group, and anybody else who wanted to participate that was up to meeting the standards that we'd set.
Yeah.
And so we expanded
Yeah.
and we grew and I wanted to collect data. I remember Ann Lowry was an early hire. She had done the fellowship. She and Rob were both fellows, and then they stayed on. We brought them back. And Ann was just terrific because she had a big picture mindset as well. And at this point, we were collecting our data prospectively as much as we could. And we were trying to model ourselves sort of after the STS, the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, who were the one specialty area
Yeah.
that had early on all agreed they were going to share data and
Yeah.
compare outcomes. And I thought that was a terrific idea. Anne agreed. She was sort of one of our people doing this, and Rob agreed. And so Anne and I went to the society's council when we were still pretty young. And we presented a proposal that the Society of Colorectal Surgeons should adopt a similar kind of thing that STS had done, that we would use the data to compare outcomes, and we would use the data to help improve other centers, and it would be a win-win. I mean, we were shot down so quickly by the council
Yeah.
saying, well, what if it shows that you're not as good as you think you are? So, well, wouldn't you want to know that? What if it's what people are going to lie? They're not going to tell you the truth. I said, what? These are physicians, for God's sakes. They should be able to, they've got to be able to tell you the truth. They're going to live the truth. Somebody's going to find out eventually. So it was that kind of a give and take for a while. But eventually, I think things did start to come around. And then, you have all the stuff about the VA was going to be terrible. And they were, and Congress was, brought out because they'd had some complications and problems. And nationally, this became a huge issue. And the academic gurus of the day were quite willing to jump all over the VA saying, oh, yeah, those guys, they're just, until they looked at their own house.
Yeah.
They were forced to look at their own house, and they found out, oh, we're not so hot either.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was a humbling experience for everybody. And I think that's the message is you can't just assume you're good. You have to look at it, compare, keep improving.
So you and I share something I don't know whether you know this or not, but when I was chair in England, I worked with a psychologist, and I actually started by trying to it's quite ambitious, this. I was trying to decipher the psychological personality of surgeons. It was a little ambitious, I appreciate. But it led me down a path that resulted in an early publication, before Charlie Bolch's publication, into the world of burnout and depersonalization.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was a shocking experience. And we actually struggled with, shall we say, the powers that be within, because it was the first time that anybody had demonstrated a high incidence of depersonalization amongst the surgeons. And, we showed that it was related to surgeons. It was not related to specialty. We compared vascular with colorectal, and they were the same. But what we also showed was that we also included nurse practitioners, and they did not suffer from the same thing.
Right.
And we had a lot of resistance with this. And I remember Charlie Bolch presenting his work at the American Surgical, and being right. And Charlie was not Mr. soft and fluffy in general, but he told the story how he was very struck, whatever the word is, by a faculty member committing suicide, etc. And I remember Murray Brennan saying, well, that doesn't happen. I don't see this in our organization. And I said to him, your own organization published work showing that a third of your faculty are abusing substances, and it was shocking for him. So, right. it's been an interest of yours
Yeah,
for, a decade or more. Um, and, how did that
more
come
than that,
about?
probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
Well, it came about when I was put into we had a departure of one of our chairs. That's Dr. Dunn, David Dunn,
Oh, yeah.
took a
Yeah.
position elsewhere after sort of a
Hmm.
confrontation with the powers that be at the U. And I was asked to be serve as an interim
Hmm.
head of the department. Uh, and I said, well, I'll do that with two provisions. One, if I like the position, I can apply for the permanent position. And number two, that I can make real decisions and do some things that matter. And so with that, I went ahead and started working on some of these things. And I had been aware of burnout for some time. I had followed the same things from the Mayo Clinic studies and other groups that had done this, and the American College of Surgeons had been involved. And one day I got a call from the program committee people. The meeting was going to be in San Francisco. They said, you've been asked to give the Hereditarian lecture at the San Francisco meeting next year. I said, well, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. And they said, and you can obviously choose the topic. You'll have a year to prepare for it, and it'll be fun to have you do this. And I said, well, can I think about the topic? And they said, oh, sure. So I thought about it for a while. I thought, okay, the topic's going to be burnout. And so I called around, I talked to people, I talked to a friend, anyway, I then called the college back, relayed through the spokesperson, here's my topic for the Rand lecture. It was 2008 or something. And there's a long pause on the other end of the phone saying, well, we were thinking maybe, you've done a lot of great work in rectal cancer or pouch surgery. Or I said, no. He said I could pick the topic, and that's my topic. And he said, well, I'll have to get back to you. So the spokesperson obviously talked to some people. I called Tom Russell, who was a friend in San Francisco, and Tom had been very involved in the American College, of course. And I don't know whether he had influence on the decision, but they called me back and subsequently they said, okay, you can give the talk, but remember, it's in one of the big Moscone Center auditoriums. We don't think that many people are going to be interested. Well, I worked really hard with that, that background. And when I got to the meeting, I mean, the auditorium was packed. And
Yeah.
you could just tell this was a topic that other people were aware of, that the people in authority had somehow been missing. So
Mm.
that taught me that watching and looking and observing again at your own workforce, what's going on here? Why are they doing this? This is a good person. How can you act that way?
Yeah.
And then understanding the burnout and looking at suicide. And I wrote a little article for one of the, it was for the NAM, for the National Academy of
Yeah.
Medicine.
Yeah.
They had a session on burnout, and I took our team that I had formed in Minnesota to go to Washington D.C. to hear this. It was great, and um, we we had been really frustrated because we had had a hard time getting national publicity. Um, there was a book called Physician Suicides,
Yeah.
and what we did was write a small from the heart article that was published online on that NAM website
Yep.
about suicides in physicians.
Yeah. I've read it. Yeah.
And just a lot of people's hearts, and I think made a big difference. And then I saw it in our own house, and I saw it in my own family. Our daughter, our middle daughter, Megan, this is nothing that she hasn't said publicly. Uh, went to Johns Hopkins for med school, was infectious disease expert. Um, she married an internist who was also a hem-onc. Doctor had a lab, high-powered couple. They had 3 kids, little kids. One had some problems with dyslexia. So the usual kinds of pressure.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
2 people really busy, and she
Yeah.
burned out in a major way. And fortunately, had the good sense and was able to get help and pulled herself back from the brink. Has totally reorganized her life. The medicine department told her she either had to be full time or no time. So she said, "Fine, I'll leave." So she took a job at the VA,
Yeah.
working half time. And her husband gave up his lab, and they now have uh, 3 kids who are flourishing, and they're each doing well. And Megan
So,
has talked about this, and one of her rounds has been publicized a lot about physician suicide and depression.
so in that article and the work around that article, there's a statement that's made that is also supported by Toby Cosgrove's comments on it that, burnout is due to systems,
Yeah.
which is a nice soundbite. And, I've no doubt there is truth in it, because the system in which you and I work today is not the system in which we entered, in any way, shape, or form. But I also think it's, my personal view is, if you look at the behaviors of burnt out people, there is a major overlap between what Bob Sutton in Stanford refers to as asshole behavior. And the question is, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And, people like the insurance companies are anxious to try and identify people who will be a problem before you're recruited, because it costs them in med and egg. Now, you and I have had an interest in this space for, let's call it 20 years, just for fun.
Yeah.
It's not changed in that time frame. As you just said about your own daughter, Hopkins said to her, in or out. We talk about it. We, nod sagely about it and shake our heads. But do you think it's changing, other than a willingness to talk?
I wish I could say it is. I'm not convinced it is.
Yeah.
And part
Yeah.
of that is the pressure of our current environment.
Yeah.
The world we live in today
Yeah.
is unsettling for people, no matter where you are, what you're doing. Um, and it just seems so unstable that it's a
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
huge concern. I think we just cannot take our eye off this problem. I certainly don't have the answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, we can't just pretend it's not there. It's there, and it's there
Yeah.
as bad as it's ever been, as far as I
No, for sure. Yeah, for sure. It is. And, I think, as much as anything else, one of the mitigating factors has been what you might refer to as the Gen Z generation, in the sense that they're not willing to work the way you and I did. They don't want to do it. It's, whether they've thought about it in that way, but their willingness to put boundaries around their work, I think, is healthier than the way most people did a generation ago, from that standpoint.
for sure. I think it is better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I've thought about as well is I mean, my wife, Kathy, is a very talented person. She was an unbelievably good student and has great talent in music and art and and I think in a different era, she probably would have had a career of her own, either as a
Yeah.
professor or done
Yeah.
something else. It just wasn't sort of in the cards at that time. And I know other women were doing it, but she's if she had done that, if she had gone on to her own profession, I couldn't have done all these things.
No. No.
Not without our family falling apart, or it would have, So I think it is a new world, and we've got
It
to
is.
understand that,
Yeah.
and we've got to accommodate to that reality.
Well, it's a new world, and I would be fairly confident in saying that you would not have had this conversation that we're having today, just the nature of the conversation, with the John Nigerian that asked you to be his butt guy.
No, it
Yeah,
would have been hard for John to have understood this. He just wouldn't have been able to sort of
yeah,
get this. And
exactly.
I appreciate that. And John became a good friend,
Sure.
and I
Yeah.
think he was always happy that he made the decision.
Now,
It wasn't
as you
something he would
uh, as you
repeat.
pointed out, you're now enormously old, and therefore you must at least at some point have considered the word retirement and what that means to you, and it means different things to different people, et cetera, et cetera. What's your sort of global statement about retirement for surgeons? Do you think it should be mandatory at an age? Do you think you should be forced to step down, or should you carry on and become Michael DeBakey? What do you think?
I don't have a good answer for you. I've thought about it a lot. I think it sort of varies a lot. I mean, we're all individuals and we all have different capacities, and we age at different rates, and we have different health problems and other things that cut into our lives. I think for me, I mean, one of the things that happened in my career was I was I fell on the ice, um, taking the garbage out one morning before I went to work, and I got a pretty significant neuropathic injury to my right arm,
Mhm.
and I couldn't operate after that. And that happened a number of years ago. So I had to sort of remake
Oh,
my career in a
yeah.
different way. A lot of people say, well, you can retire, you get great benefits. I said, I don't want to retire. I've got other things I can do. So that's when I expanded my horizon in terms of doing some of the other things I've gotten involved in with um, the School of Medicine and the School of Nursing, and working with other systems.
Yeah.
But I think it is it's such an individualized thing. But I do think, having seen people who should not be operating continue to operate, is not right. And
Mm.
we have to do better at finding ways to prevent them from injuring people.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. I recognize that.
So
But boy, we just can't.
I don't think anybody would disagree with that, although the actual application of it, as you say, is not easy. Um, but I would also contend that in the same way that there comes a point when you can't operate, for some people, whatever it might be, um,
Yeah.
the same applies for those leadership skills. I've always been,
Yeah.
I was 15 years a chairman, and I think that was enough. Let somebody else
Yeah.
have a go. Let's and the person who comes in after you is, you always think, oh, I could have done that differently, etc. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. What matters is your time. You did your bit. You move on. And we're equally bad at identifying the chair who's been there, who's grimly hanging on for one more year or 5 more years, etc. We're very bad at that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We are. We are. And I think it's human nature in many ways, and
Yeah.
especially of the obsessive compulsive kind of behavior
Yeah.
that we often see exhibited in our profession.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you
Um,
a tough question now.
but I think the just culture is a concept that I think can help with thinking that through. Thinking about human error,
Yeah.
and then at risk behavior, and dangerous behavior, and you try to figure out, is this person, where do they fit in this spectrum? And boy, you just can't
Yeah.
you can't let these things go untouched.
Yeah, Julie Freischlag told me that, one of her senior colleagues once said that they were wholly in favor of term limits for chairs, and he thought that should be introduced shortly after he retired. And
Shortly after he retired,
yeah, exactly, yeah. So,
yeah.
I said I was going to ask you a tough question. You said at the outset of this that your definition of success, your desire, was to make an impact, to make a difference.
Yeah.
So you look back now, did you?
Yeah, I think I did. I think I did. And I've been very fortunate to have people tell me that, continue to call me for advice. And one of the best things I ever did was at least one of my nursing colleagues in the School of Public Health, and I started a leadership program for physicians in 2008 or something like that. It was after I had been the interim chair, then Dr. Vickers, Selwyn Vickers, was made the permanent chair. Rob Madoff had moved into my position as chief of the division of colorectal surgery at that point. And so I've assumed that I'll go back and work under Rob and do some other things in the division. And Selwyn said, no, you know where the problems are. You know where the assets are. You're staying here as my deputy chair to help me run this department. And Selwyn and I had a great run together. And we were able to get that through. And along the way, right after Selwyn arrived, about 4 months after he arrived, the faculty surprised me with an announcement at Grand Rounds that they had raised funds behind my back to establish an annual Rothenberger lecture.
Wonderful.
And I was really, I was really touched.
Yeah.
And then my second thought was, an annual lecture once a year, what's that going to do for anybody? So I went to my friend Tom Gillum in the School of Nursing, or in the School of Public Health, a nurse who had led a physician training program in St. Paul at St. Thomas Academy or St. Thomas College. And that had been very successful. I'd always wanted to take it and never had time. But I met Tom and we worked together and together developed what we call the Emerging Physician Leaders Program. And we had two groups of people advising us. One was a group of community business leaders, bankers, and people at hardcore business types who understood the industry from the financial and other perspectives. And then a group of people from the medical center, physicians advising us. And out of that came this program called EPLP, Emerging Physician Leaders Program. And we got every department would nominate 1 to 3 people from their mid-level people who they thought would be worthy of, might be able to stay if we taught them. And Tom's insistence was the most important part. He said it has to be over a prolonged period of time. So the program was scheduled to be 3 years. We meet every 3 months.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you have a psychiatrist sitting next to a pediatrician, sitting next to a pathologist, next to a thoracic surgeon. For 3 months, a day and a half, every 3 months we met. We brought in people who were outstanding speakers and could help us learn adaptive leadership skills. And we did that for 3 years.
Amazing.
And at the end of it was amazing. And each year, the Rothenberger lecturer would meet with the cohort.
Right. Yeah.
And those were some incredibly powerful stories.
Yeah.
They would meet.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They would often tell them what they had been through. So you had people like Walter Mondale. You had people like one of our astronauts. So it's really been fun. And this in a couple of weeks, we're having the same thing. And Neil Kashkari, who's the president of the Fed here in this area of the country, is going to be speaking.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic achievement. I'm in goes without saying that in the field that I occupy, your impact has been immeasurable over many years, and doesn't, but it doesn't. Too many achievements to record. How do you? Not that you're going anywhere right now. How would you like
Yeah.
to be remembered?
I think as a guy who gave it his all, who tried to keep his values intact throughout all of this, who really looked hard at what was going on in the room. The idea of, being able to step back and say, what's going on here? Is this a technical problem or is this an adaptive problem? And that's a huge concept to get straight in your mind.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, if you see someone have a cardiac arrest in the grocery store, that's a technical problem.
Yeah.
You got to resuscitate that patient. You know what you do it. Surgeons are good at that. But if you see a group of people sitting in some committee meeting and people are mumbling behind their back and they're talking more in the hallway than they are in the meeting, you've got an adaptive problem.
Yeah.
And you have to learn that difference. And then you need to be able to bring that to the fore, because those adaptive problems are what destroy us. That's what destroys us. We're good at technical things, but we're not very good at making these adaptive changes.
So just to close in the last
Really
minute, I didn't learn until I interviewed Keith Lillimo, actually, that he was also a Dakota boy. I'd not read. Yeah, exactly. So just a final question for you. What would you say to the young David Rothenberger in the Dakota now? What piece of advice would you give that young kid?
It'd be the same advice I'd give anybody anywhere in this world, and that is follow your heart. Don't let people stop you from achieving what you might be able to achieve. If you're going to fail at times, just pick yourself back up, figure out why you failed, and see if you can't improve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a continuous cycle.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. So, well, thank you so much, David, for spending the last hour or so. It's been a huge pleasure and honor for me to talk to you. We roll these things, or when I say we, it sounds very grandiose. It's entirely me. I roll them out. I try and sprinkle the colorectal people amongst the other specialties, etc. Yada yada.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's been a real pleasure having you. So thank you so much.
Hope to see you soon, John.